Hello and welcome to our May the 28th session for discussing how the categories work within RealtyJuggler. This webinar is going to range all over the place, but we're going to mostly stick to the category of how categories can work to go ahead and help you organize your contacts and, of course, market to the right people at the right time. If you've got questions, go ahead and please leave those as comments to this thread. We will get to them after the main part of the presentation, but I'm just going to dive right in. Hope you're all ready. And of course, this will be available afterwards as an archive, and you'll be able to go ahead and play this either by clicking the last week's archive or going to our channel or our Google Plus page to play this again at any time you like. So let's start off with what is a category. A category is simply a label that you can apply to a record to go ahead and organize it. A record can have more than one category. So when we go into our prospects, I think I've only got one record in there right now, you can see that there are no categories for this guy. But as this prospect has indicated that he's looking to sell his current house and buy another one, then let's go ahead and add some categories for him. As you can see, there's a ton of categories here, and I only have one record, so that seems kind of crazy, right? Let's go ahead and add seller and buyer prospect as categories. I just typed those in, but if you've already got them pre-built, they're going to be available to you to just go ahead and pick off of this drop-down menu. In this case, I'm just adding them and going ahead and saving that record by clicking done. So you can see that I've got these two categories listed for this guy. But strangely, I've got a bunch of categories in here from before. Now, I personally use prospects as the place that you'd go ahead and start off a record. So in other words, if I was importing a farm list, or if I had prospect records coming in from a different source, such as an email feed, which we will talk about this next week, I'm going to have categories all over the place. In this case, I want to clean that up. There are two ways you can do that. You can go ahead and pick a category that is not in use, for example, this weird one right here, and we'll prompt you to go ahead and delete it. Since there are no items that are using that category, we can simply delete that category by clicking here. But as you can see, I have a ton, and it's going to take a long time to just go ahead and single click those things and answer yes to it. So the first place we're going to go is to go to our preferences and see where that category list is stored. So we're going back to main, and we're going into settings, and we're clicking on preferences. Since we were in the prospects database, here's the prospects tab, and you can see this list of categories. You can type new categories into this list if you want to, even copy and paste them from another source, but in this case, I want to go ahead and get rid of all of them. I'm just going to go ahead and highlight them and delete them. Now, the two categories that I added to that one record that I have is going to be maintained. In other words, that list of categories will be rebuilt. So let's go there now, go back into prospects. You can see that this record still has those categories. So that list is simply what's going to appear in this show category dropdown. And as you can see, just the two that I typed in are now there. And if we go back to that list, you can see that those categories are right here. And like I was saying, you can go ahead and add other categories, including colors, such as blue or yellow, if I could type. And so forth. There's all the primary colors are available. So when I go back and look at that prospect list, if I wanted to go ahead and give this guy some priority, I could go ahead and give him a color, and you can see that this color is represented by the color orange. Now, if you're synchronizing with Outlook, those colors will also be used by Outlook, and that's one of the reasons we support them, of course, but it's kind of cool to be able to go ahead and organize your contacts in such a way that you could indicate hot with red, for example. It's up to you. The categories are pretty flexible. As you can see, you can have as many categories really as you like. The only real limitation is back on this list, the drop down, if it's too extensive, in other words, if you've got a couple hundred, I think it'll take up to 200 different categories, will actually be hard to use. So keeping the category list as simple as possible while still being able to categorize your contacts in such a way that you can send the information that you want to the right people is kind of important. Let's go into the contacts database where I have a lot more records. Here I've got a bunch of records that we imported just a little over a week ago, and the whole idea is that I've imported these records from someplace. I know some of these people personally. I just haven't gone to the trouble of adding categories. Just like in the prospects database, I could go ahead and click into a particular record and go ahead and add or remove the categories simply by highlighting and deleting, or picking one from a list, or typing in a new one. Since they're on my former buyers list, I'm just going to go ahead and put that in there. And as you can see, I got rid of the import date that I had in there before. So when I click done, you can see that this guy has that category. The other thing that you can do is go ahead and apply a category to a bunch of records all at once. For that, you'll use select multiple rows. You've probably seen select multiple rows throughout the system. It's pretty much the same sort of interface no matter where you go. So when I click multiple rows, I can go ahead and check off a bunch of records and then do an operation with them all at once. For example, I know that these people are all members of my church mailing list. So I'm going to go ahead and add a category for those records. I can either go ahead and pick one of the existing ones, or I can create a new one. And there we've added a category for those people. Oh, one of the things I forgot to do here, though, is I forgot to go ahead and remove the import date. That import date doesn't really mean anything to me other than it's a placeholder category. So let's go ahead and check off some of those same records. And then on the do multiple list, I can go ahead and remove a category. The category I want to remove is that import date. So using the select multiple rows, you can go ahead and add categories to whatever records you need and for whatever purpose you need. One of the interesting things that we've got in RealtyJuggler is the ability to have a negation category, a not category. And instead of applying a not category to this list, the way you would do it is to go back to settings and preferences. In this case, we're going to go to contacts. And we've added this church mailing list category. Well, we can also have a category called not church mailing list. And what this category will contain is all of the records that are not in that church mailing list. So let's go back to contacts and see how that works. We'll go up here to our show category, and as you can see, we didn't add that category, that not church mailing list, to anybody. But it's going to show up in our show category list. And you can see that although I've got 499 records, 12 of which are in this church mailing list, all of the rest of the records are going to be in this not church mailing list. It may be a little confusing, but the idea is simply you can create a category that'll show you all of the records that aren't in a particular category, which is kind of handy if you're looking to do one thing, for example, sending something church related to these people, while sending something not church related to all of these people. And of course, you can use that for anything. It's just a nice handy shortcut to go ahead and see how that works. Now, that particular topic is also covered in a YouTube video. And that YouTube video is tutorial 41. So if you wanted to learn more about how not works, tutorial 41, and really it's a pretty good video to watch after this one if you're looking to learn a little bit more about how categories works. So now that we've got categories for some of these records, how are we going to use it? Well, categories are the primary, actually the only way that you're going to be doing things to a group of people at once. So for example, if I wanted to send an email to all of the people on my church mailing list, I'm going to go ahead and do that by going back to the main screen, into Mail, and going ahead and doing a bulk email. So I'm going to send this email to all my contacts matching a show category. And whenever it talks about a show category, that's going to be right up here in the upper right. In this case, I'm going to send an email to my church mailing list. And I'm going to go ahead and send a standard template. I'm going to set it to just the first email in each record, and I'm going to go ahead and send a record for a referral solicitation. And you can see that all of these records have an email address, and I can go ahead and create that email batch simply by clicking here. And it's going to go ahead and send a letter to each of those people on my list, all by using this category. Now, categories can be used to go ahead and send bulk emails, mass printed letters, even going ahead and printing labels. So if I wanted to go ahead and send a printed letter, for example, to all the people that were not on my church mailing list, I can go ahead and go to Labels and Envelopes, go ahead and pick, again, All Contacts Matching Show category. In this case, I'm going to use that negation category, and it's going to show you that I'm going to print labels for all of these people. There are some options, of course, but we're not going to get into it. But the idea is that categories are really kind of the primary way you're going to organize your data. Now, the other thing besides categories that are kind of fall into the category realm is when you go into a listing, a buyer record, or a closing record. Let's go into listings. Instead of having categories up here, there's a status. Now that status is going to show what the status of that record is. For example, in this case, we've got just two records, one that's a prospective listing and one that is a listing that's gone under contract. So that record has a corresponding closing record. But if you can also see that I've got the word or name Ron in here. So if I click into this record, you can see that there's a field called Extra Status. Extra Status for buyer records, listing records, and closing records are really kind of the same thing as categories. So for example, if I wanted to go ahead and have a way of organizing a large number of closing records, for example, or listing records in this case, I could go ahead and add an extra status. Now here, there's a little short list. You can type one in, but really the way to do it is to go ahead and pick one off of this list. Since this is a record that, let's say, it closed last year, let's go ahead and put 2013 in there. You don't have to keep your listing records. Some people do for a while. But that's one way I can go ahead and organize that, and you can see that the status is here. And I can go ahead and pick that as a show status and look at just that record if I want to, or in this case, if you had 20 closings for last year, you could see just the closings that happened last year. Now, the way to go ahead and add those extra status values is, again, back on that main settings preferences screen. But in this case, since those are applying to all three of those types of databases, the buyer record, the listing record, and the closing record, let's go to the General tab. And here is where those extra status values are. And you can go ahead and put in, add or delete, whatever you like from this list. Again, you can also use color to help organize that. And they work in much the same way. I'm going to go ahead and go to see what questions you guys have now. And I'm not seeing any questions regarding how categories work. Let's go back into contacts and look at multiple rows. Multiple rows is an excellent way to go ahead and add categories as we've seen, but I just wanted to take a look and show you some of the other options. One of the important ones is set, and set is very different than an add in that when you go ahead and add a category, it's simply going to be added to your list of existing categories. When you set a category for selected records, it's going to replace those categories, whatever categories you have, with that one category. For example, here we've got our former buyer, and I'm going to go ahead and add a bunch of categories at random. So here's our categories that we've added for this person. If I went ahead, did the select multiple rows, checked off a number of records, and said set a category for the selected records and picked the category export, take a look at what happens. It's going to say, ask you, are you sure you want to remove the categories and replace it? If you said yes, there they are. They've been replaced with the word export. So when I go to this category, you can see the ones that have that category. So it's one of those things that you're going to have to be careful with. I mean, set's pretty powerful, and it's handy if you've junked up a record with too many categories. For example, this one has a bunch of categories. But at the same time, you know, it's one of those things that's nice to know about and to have. I can't think of anything else that really needs to be covered with categories. It's a fairly simple concept. It's just one of those things that's handy to know about organizing your contacts, organizing even your buyer and listing and closing records. But if you've got any questions, remember, you can always go from the main screen into Contact Us and send us an email, or of course you can give us a call, and we're here for you for answering those kinds of questions. Next week we're going to be discussing how email feed works. So what we're going to be covering is under your main settings email feed screen, we're going to be covering how feeding prospects in works. Okay, we've got a couple of questions. Can you select multiple categories to work with at one time? In other words, buyers and sellers. Absolutely. That's a very good point. If you were going to go ahead and do an operation either here or in mailing something, I could go ahead and go up and say select multiple rows, and you can see where it says select from this list multiple times. I can pick two categories. For example, I could pick that buyer record, and I could pick, you know, didn't have sellers here, but I could pick prospects, and you can see that if I have either the buyer or the prospect category, it's going to go ahead and show any of those records that have either one of those. So if I was going ahead and sending a mailing, for example, I wanted to mass print some letters, I could go ahead and say all contacts match show category and pick that buyer or prospect, and it's going to go ahead and send letters to those two people. Janice is asking if we can use multiple categories as a not. With the negation category, it's kind of tricky, and so I would probably recommend that you don't do that. But what I think that you're asking, Janice, is if you can go ahead and have a not category for agents, a not category for friends, a not category for family, and then go ahead and pick them this way. I believe that's going to give you some really weird results. So I wouldn't recommend it. I guess I would go ahead and just go ahead and use the select multiple rows and check box off those records and create a category that would cover just those people. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Like I said, if you've got anything more that you want to ask us, you can contact us in a variety of ways. Hope to see you this next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time for our discussion on how email feed works. Hope you have a great day.